Homo sapiens have existed for roughly 300,000 years. Every legal system, every marriage ceremony, every divorce lawyer, all of that lives inside the last 5,000. The other 295,000 years, we have bones, tools, fire pits, and the behavioral patterns of modern hunter-gatherer groups who still live something close to that original life. What those groups show us is genuinely strange. For most of human prehistory, people lived in groups of 25 to 50 individuals. No strangers, no cities, no anonymity. Whatever you did in front of the same 30 people you'd see every day for the rest of your life. There was no leaving, no blocking someone, no moving to a different city after a bad breakup. That one fact changes the entire picture of what ancient sexuality actually looked like. Here's what researchers expected to find when they started studying modern hunter-gatherer groups seriously. Either total sexual freedom, no laws, no consequences, or strict pair bonding, because survival required cooperation. They found neither. The Hadza of Tanzania, the Kungsan of the Kalahari, the Ache of Paraguay. These groups, studied intensively from the 1960s onward, show a pattern that doesn't fit either assumption. Anthropologist Kim Hill spent decades living with the ache in the field. What he documented wasn't chaos and it wasn't monogamy. It was something closer to serial commitment, people pairing up, raising children together for a few years, then separating and finding someone new. More fluid than what most of us grew up assuming was natural, less chaotic than the no-rules fantasy. And here's the part that surprised researchers most. The separation tended to happen around a specific point. Helen Fisher, biological anthropologist at Rutgers University, spent 25 years analyzing divorce records across 62 societies in the United Nations. Demographic yearbook. What she found across cultures, across continents, across radically different social structures, divorces cluster around the 4th year of marriage. 4 years. Roughly the time it takes to get a child through early infancy and into a stage where one parent can manage alone. That's either a strange coincidence or it's not a coincidence at all. To understand why that pattern exists, you have to look at our closest genetic relatives, and when you do, something stops making sense. Chimpanzees share 98.7% of our DNA. Their social structure runs on male dominance, competition for females, and occasional lethal violence. Bonobos share 98.7% of our DNA. Same number, exactly. Their social structure runs on female alliances, and they resolve conflict in ways that would make a documentary filmmaker nervous. Almost no recorded lethal violence between groups. We are equidistant from both of them. For decades, researchers used the chimpanzee model to argue that male competition and dominance were simply natural for humans. Then bonobos came into the scientific literature with completely different behaviors and an identical genetic distance from us. The argument collapsed. What this actually means is that you cannot read a fixed human sexuality off our DNA. We are a species capable of an enormous range of social structures. The record suggests we've tried most of them, but here's where it gets specific. Physical anthropology can now read sexual behavior from ancient skeletal remains in ways that seemed impossible a generation ago. Tooth enamel records stress. Ancient DNA tells us who was related to whom, who was buried together, who shared a household. At a site called Uhlau in Germany, dating to around 4,600 years ago, archaeologists found families buried together, mother, father, children in, positions suggesting they were holding each other at the moment of death. Genetic testing confirmed the biological relationships. These were nuclear families in the modern sense of the word. That's the earliest direct physical evidence we have for pair-bonded nuclear family units anywhere in the archaeological record, 4,600 years ago. On a 300,000-year timeline, before that, the picture is murkier and considerably more interesting. So what changed? What was already changing by 4,600 years ago? Agriculture. Before farming, there wasn't much to own. You moved with the seasons. When you died, you didn't leave behind fields or livestock or stored grain. Without heritable property, the question of biological paternity carried different weight than it does in a property-owning society. Farming changed that. Suddenly, there were fields, livestock, granaries, things with real value across generations. And once inheritance exists, the question of whose child receives it becomes economically urgent in a way it simply wasn't before. Friedrich Engels argued this explicitly in 1884, that formalized monogamy and the restriction of women's sexuality emerged at the same historical moment as private property, not before it. Engels had obvious political reasons for saying so. But the timing in the archaeological record is harder to wave away than his politics. At Çatalhöyük, a Neolithic settlement in Turkey inhabited from roughly 7,500 to 5,700 BC, before agriculture fully consolidated, bone analysis shows men and women with similar diets, similar physical workloads, similar rates of disease. No skeletal evidence of a dominant male class controlling resources. Then agriculture intensifies. Populations grow, hierarchies develop, and the bones shift. Women's skeletons begin showing more repetitive labor stress. Burial goods become less equal. What emerges over roughly 1,000 years starts to look like what we'd recognize as historical patriarchy. The sequence is there. Draw your own conclusions. Here's what almost never comes up in these conversations: jealousy. If ancient humans had more flexible arrangements, does that mean they didn't feel it? Almost certainly not. Jealousy shows up in every human culture ever studied, including cultures with explicitly multi-partner norms. What varies is how it gets handled, not whether it exists. David Buss, evolutionary psychologist at the University of Texas, has studied jealousy across 37 cultures on 6 continents. His conclusion: it's universal. The emotional experience, the physiological response, elevated heart rate, intrusive thinking, hypervigilance toward rivals, it shows up everywhere. Humans have been studied in depth. The reason isn't mysterious. Paternity uncertainty was a real reproductive problem. A man who felt nothing when his partner was with someone else would, on average, leave fewer surviving children than one who responded to that threat. So the feeling got selected for over hundreds of thousands of years. Ancient humans with more flexible social structures weren't emotionally alien to us. They felt everything you feel. What differed was the architecture built around those feelings. And some cultures built something genuinely different. The Mosuo people of Yunnan province in China have practiced what they call walking marriages for centuries. Women live in their mother's household their entire lives. Men visit at night and return to their own mother's household by morning. Children are raised by the mother and her brothers. There's no word in Mosuo for father the way we use it. I'll be honest, when I first read about this, my instinct was to look for what was broken about it. There isn't much. Communities report low rates of domestic violence. Social cohesion is high. It works in the specific way that social systems work when they've had centuries to stabilize. One example doesn't prove anything, but it does prove that the emotional architecture, attachment, jealousy, care for children, can be organized very differently than what you grew up assuming was simply human nature. So come back to the feeling from the beginning of this video, that attachment when a relationship ended. The specific weight of it, that feeling is not a modern invention. It's not a product of romantic comedies or wedding culture or anything recent. It's ancient. It evolved because humans who formed deep attachments to partners raised more surviving children than ones who didn't. The feeling is functional. It was solving a problem long before anyone had words for it. What is recent, very recent, is the specific social structure built around that feeling. The permanent, exclusive, legally enforced pair bond that most modern cultures treat as the default human arrangement is younger than writing. Younger than the wheel, younger than a lot of things we think of as old. The wiring underneath it is 300,000 years old. Every society has had to decide what to do with that wiring. The Mosuo built one answer. Agricultural Europe built another. The Hadza built a third. None of them got handed the answer. They all invented it under pressure. The one you inherited feels inevitable because it's the only one you've ever lived inside. It isn't inevitable. It's just the most recent experiment. And somewhere in the gap between the ancient wiring and the recent rules, that's probably where most of your relationship questions actually live.